Dear students, welcome to the new session. Today's topic for discussion is Indian model of corporate governance. Last session we have discussed the different global models of governance, right? So today the discussion is focused on our own country. In the light of intense competition and dynamism that prevails in the Indian business environment at present. So one of the keys for the long-term growth and success appears to be the ability of striking a fine balance between sound corporate governance practice on one hand and a sustainable growth model on the other hand. Corporate governance, after completing 3 sessions lecture, right now you can easily understand how integral component corporate governance is in the myriad of issues from governance standards, business standards, accounting standards, from corporate social responsibility to supply chain management, from a very financial crisis to a tool for ensuring microeconomic stability. So we need this governance standard principles and practices to have a balance for the sustainable growth approach. So in today's session we are going to discuss more about the Indian economy, how far corporate governance has become an important integral part in our economy. So if you look at the past decade, it has seen more number of scandals and shareholder disputes. Regulators, they have responded to these challenges, introducing new legislation and several interventions. So the Indian corporate governance framework focuses on 3 major aspects. The first is protection of minority shareholders. Second, accountability of the board of directors and the management of company. Third, timely reporting and adequate disclosures to shareholders. So the framework focuses on major 3 aspects. The organizational framework, especially with corporate governance initiatives in India, established by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, SEBI, and they regulate the corporate governance of listed companies in India. And they have this provision in the clause 49. So they have incorporated the listing agreement, which is compulsory for the companies to comply with the provisions. In India, if you see, we have different committees, right? I already discussed this. So how it has all started? So the first is by the Companies Act 2013. They have rephrased and all the other provisions were introduced, repealing the old Companies Act 1956. So the new Companies Act 2013, they have provided a formal structure for corporate governance by enhancing disclosures, reporting and transparency as well as new compliance norms. And other legislations, they have this base of corporate governance principles as well. The issue for corporate governance for the listed companies came into prominence with the report of Kumar Mangalam Birla Committee, which was introduced in 2000, which was set up by SEBI. They have suggested this new clause 49. So clause 49 has been introduced to promote good corporate governance. That was the focus. And then this was followed by the constitution of Narayana Murthy's committee in 2003. Again, it was set up by SEBI as well. That has provided recommendations on the issues faced by the committees like audit committee, independent directors, what are the different recommendations required by the Risk and Management Committee, Code of Conduct, how will be the financial disclosure. So these are all the different things where the Indian model of corporate governance was focusing on. If you ask me, in India we have seen from Kautilya's model till now, because Kautilya's Arthashastra is acknowledged worldwide in the philosophy of governance in managing a particular kingdom, right? So from there to now, we have gone through several different dimensions. Corporate governance is essential on all about how the corporations are directed, managed, controlled, and held accountable to their shareholders, right? In India, the question of corporate governance has come up mainly in the wake of economic liberalization and deregularization of industry and business. So with the rapid pace of globalization, many companies have been forced to tap the international financial markets, and consequently they are facing greater competition. So both policy makers and business managers, they have become increasingly aware of the importance of the improved standard of corporate governance. India has become one of the best corporate governance laws, but poor implementation, when you are combining that with socialistic policies of the pre-Reformation era, so it has affected the corporate governance. And then we need to know the fact that the evolution of corporate governance in India, the concept of good governance is very old in India, dating back to the 3rd century. So that's what I was talking about, where Chanakya elaborated the fourfold duties: Raksha, Riddhi, Yogashema and Palana. So during that particular kingdom, where he was talking about the different principles of corporate governance, protecting the shareholders' wealth is Raksha. Enhancing the wealth by proper utilization of assets, Riddhi. Maintenance of wealth through profitable ventures, Palana. And above all, safeguarding the interests of the shareholder, Yogakshema. So corporate governance was not in agenda of Indian companies until the early 1990s. No one would find much reference to this subject in the book of law till then. In India, weakness in the system like undesirable stock market practices, board of directors without adequate fiduciary responsibilities, poor disclosure practices, lack of transparency, chronic capitalism. So everything was not in a proper way. It were all crying for reforms and improved governance. In 1991, due to the fiscal crisis, that resulted the need to approach the IMF, that induced the government to adopt some reformative actions for economic stabilization through liberalization. So as part of the liberalization process, the government amended the Companies Act. So which was introduced in 1956, was again subsequently being given with further amendments in 2000, 2002, 2003, and it was all done by institutions like SEBI, Ministry of Corporate Affairs and Government of India as well. So reforming the corporate governance in India since 1990s have taken different transformations. The first is CII, Confederation of Indian Industries. It has set up a task force in 1995 under Rahul Bajaj, as you know, a reputed industrialist. And in 1999, the CII released a code called Desirable Corporate Governance. And that has taken us into various aspects of corporate governance, and it has started to criticize the directors, suggested the dilution of government risks and stakes in companies. So that was the first one given by CAI. Then followed by that, Kumaramangalam Birla Committee. So when the CAI code was well received by the corporate sector, and some progressive companies, they have also started to adopt it, and it was felt under the Indian conditions. So a statutory rather than a voluntary code would be more meaningful. So the second major initiative was undertaken by SEBI, which has set up a committee under the chairmanship of Kumaramangalam Birla with the objective of promoting and rising the standards of corporate governance. In the early 2000s, SEBI accepted and ratified the key recommendations of this committee, and that has started to be incorporated where clause 49 of the listing agreement of stock exchanges was introduced. Then the third one is the Department of Corporate Affairs, which was formed a broad study group under the chairmanship of Dr. Sanjeev Reddy. This group was given with an ambitious task of examining the ways in which to operationalize the concept of corporate excellence on a sustained basis, so as to sharpen the India's global competitive edge and to further develop the corporate culture in the country. So this task force has worked on corporate excellence. It was set up by a group, and each and every committee, as of now I have said, they have to submit a report that has to comprise of the range of recommendations for rising the governance standards among all the companies in India. So this was done by the Department of Corporate Affairs. That's the third one. Now coming to the fourth committee, Naresh Chandra's committee report. This was appointed by the Ministry of Finance and Companies Affairs in the year 2002. It was headed by Naresh Chandra to examine and recommend any internal amendments to the law that has to involve the auditor-client relationships and the role of independent directors. So the committee made recommendations in two key aspects of governance. What they have given is that the first is financial one, and second is non-financial disclosure and independent auditing and board oversight of management. So this committee has focused on these two aspects, and they are supposed to give recommendations on that. That's what done by the Naresh Chandra's committee. Followed by that, in 2002, Narayana Murthy's committee report was submitted, and this committee was constituted by SEBI as well for reviewing the implementation of corporate governance code by the listed companies, and then the issue of the revised clause 49. See, some of the major recommendations of the committee related to audit reports, audit committee, independent directors, risk management, party transactions, directorships, director compensation, about the code of conduct and financial disclosure. So these are all the aspects where the Narayana Murthy committee was looked into, and they have given recommendations as well. So after liberalization, serious efforts have been made to overhaul the system with SEBI formulating the clause 49. Because clause 49 requires some key features. See, first is board independence, second is audit committee, third is disclosure. Board independence, board of directors of the listed companies must have a minimum number of independent directors. In audit committee, listed companies must have audit committee with a minimum of 3 directors, 2/3 of whom must be independent. I'm again repeating this point. Every listed company should have an audit committee, and in every audit committee of the board has to comprise of a minimum of 3 directors, 2/3 of whom should be independent. Third is disclosure. Listed companies must periodically make various disclosures regarding financial and other matters to ensure transparency. So clause 49 talks more about all these things. It has come to effect in 2005 with all these key requirements. Then the next committee which I want to discuss as part of the Indian model of governance is J.J. Irani Committee. So the Companies Act 1956 was enacted on the recommendations of the Baba Committee set up in 1950, and then it has provided some new base for governance to the independent India. Now, with the enactment of the legislation in 1956, the Companies Act 1913 was repealed. Now, after all these amendments and things, we have again gone with a fresh initiative under the chairmanship of Dr. J.J. Irani in 2004 with the task of advising the government on the proposed revisions of the Companies Act in 1956. So this committee's major task is to advise the government to revise the existing Act 1956 Companies Act. Then the next committee is Central Coordination and Monitoring Committee. It was co-chaired by the Department of Corporate Affairs, now Ministry of Corporate Affairs Secretary and Chairman. SEBI was set up by the Department of Corporate Affairs. So they monitor the action taken against the vanishing companies. So what is this committee's objective is? They will look after the actions taken against the vanishing companies, and then if there are any promoters who misused the funds raised from the public. So what was decided by the committee is that 7 task forces they have set up at Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, Kolkata, Ahmedabad, Bangalore and Hyderabad to monitor these aspects. So Central Coordination and Monitoring Committee's work is that. Then National Foundation of Corporate Governance. So Ministry of Company Affairs, they have set up a national foundation, NFCG, National Foundation for Corporate Governance, in association with CII. And again with ICSI, Institute of Company Secretaries of India, and ICAI as well, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So this was set up by the Ministry of Company Affairs. Then there were voluntary guidelines issued by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. In that, the first guideline given is the offices of chairman of the board and the chief executive officer should be separate. They should not share the common office. And the second is the company may have a nomination committee which should comprise a majority of independent directors, including its chairman. And the independent directors should not be paid with stock options or any profit-based commission. This is the second guideline. The third is the board should provide training for the directors. And the fourth, the audit committee should be composed of at least 3 members with independent directors as the majority. And as well, the independent director should be the chairperson. The audit partner, they should be rotated at every 3 years. And the firm should be rotated every 5 years. And you should appoint an internal auditor as well. The committee may appoint an internal auditor as well. So, what are the guidelines given? Who has given the guidelines? The guidelines, voluntary guidelines were issued by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. These were the guidelines introduced by them in the year 2009. Now coming to the ownership structure, there are two sets of issues pertaining to the ownership structure of the listed companies in India. First, there is a high concentration of ownership which gives particular individuals or families or effective control of most of the companies, no? So, publicly traded companies, their focus will be on them. Second, a large number of companies in India, they are grouped together under the common control of a single shareholder or family. So, the ownership structure is in such a way. One is the high concentration of ownership based on family, based on a particular individual. The control will be, most of the company's control will be on them. The other side of issue is that large number of companies in India are grouped together. So they have a single shareholder and then they are being grouped together. So this is the ownership structure. According to the Companies Act 2013, there was a major development for governance as well. The new act replaces the company's older one to improve the governance standard, to simplify the regulations, to enhance the interest of the minority shareholders. So starting from there, let me give you some important clauses. What are the guidelines given to improve the standards? So please make a note of this. The first is clause 166, which talks about the board of directors. So according to Companies Act 2013, clause 166, the act provides that the company can have a maximum of 15 directors on the board. A max of 15 directors. The second clause 149 talks about the independent director. So there is a concept of IG, independent directors, has been introduced for the first time in the company law in India in 2013. So according to clause 149, independent directors should be introduced by the Companies Act. Then the next clause is 188. Clause 188 talks about the related party transaction. So this new act requires that no company should enter into RPT, that is related party transaction contract, pertaining to sale, purchase or supply of any goods or materials. So this is about the clause 188. Clause 135 talks about corporate social responsibility. This act has mandated the profit-making companies to spend on the CSR related activities. Obviously, that will improve the society as well. And when you are part of a corporate world, how you are socially responsible, how you held responsible for the societal reforms and developments as well. So clause 135 talks about corporate social responsibility. The next clause is 139 talks about auditors. So a listed company, they cannot appoint or reappoint an individual as auditor for more than one term of 5 consecutive years. According to clause 139 of Companies Act 2013, a listed company can't appoint or reappoint an individual as an auditor for more than one term of 5 consecutive years. The next clause 92. Clause 92 talks about disclosure and reporting. So in this new act, there is a transformation, which is a significant one, in non-financial annual disclosures and reporting by companies. So as compared to the earlier format in Companies Act 1956, there was a significant transformation in the way of disclosure. Then clause 245, for the first time, a provision has been made for class action suits. This particular clause 245 talks about class action suits, under which this order passed by the tribunal shall be binding on all the stakeholders, including the company and all its members, depositors and auditors. So this was the first time introduced by that. Now what are the challenges and the imperatives we can discuss here is that, see, a corporation should be fair and transparent to its shareholders for all its transactions. And this has become imperative in today's business world, in a globalized business world, where corporations need to access global pools of capital. We need to attract and retain the best human capital from various parts of the world, isn't it? So unless a corporation embraces and demonstrates an ethical conduct, it will not be able to succeed. So this is imperative, so that you need to have a fair, good governance standard. And we know that governance plays a vital part in the success of any organization. The ability to mobilize or utilize all kinds of resources to meet the objectives clearly set as part of the planning process. So it is all about an ethical conduct in business. Ethics is concerned with the code of values and principles, and that enables a person to choose between right and wrong. And obviously there will be ethical dilemmas that arise from conflicting interests. So that is a challenge, that is it quite possible that an effort of arriving the best possible financial results or business results, there could be any attempt in doing things. See, there is also a possibility of grey areas where an act is not illegal but considered unethical. They raise some moral issues. So strong corporate governance is indispensable to resilient and vibrant capital market, because as it is an important instrument of investor protections. Another important aspect to realize is that, see, the spirit of corporate governance is more important than the form. Substance is more important than style. Values are the essence of corporate governance. This will have to be clearly articulated. Procedures devised so that values are practiced. So unless until you devise the systems and procedures well, then you can't practice the values. We can all have a common moral problem in running enterprises. One can have practices which are legal but which are unethical. In fact, many a time, tax planning exercises may border on the fine razor's edge between strictly legal or patently unethical. So openness, integrity and accountability are the key elements of corporate governance. And that plays a very important role. You take banks for example, they deal with trust. If the trust is in suspicion, damaged or lost, that will result in a financial loss that can't measure the true risk. So, corporate governance extends beyond corporate law. Its objective is not just the mere fulfillment of legal requirements, but ensuring the commitment on managing transparent process for maximizing the shareholders' value. So we need to have a value-based corporate culture. For any organization to run in a very effective way, it needs to have certain ethics, values. Long-run business firms needs to have a good corporate culture, set of beliefs, values, principles. There should be a holistic view. Compliance with laws. And you need to connect corporate governance with human resource management for any corporate body for that matter. Employees or staff are just like family. For a company to be perfect, the role of HRM becomes very vital. They both are directly linked. Every individual should be treated with respect. His achievement should be recognized. and they should be given best of opportunities to prove their worth. It can be done by the HR department. And every corporate body needs to take a risk of innovation. We have learned a lot from the corporate failure. Every story has a moral to learn. Every failure has success to learn. Every corporate body has certain policies which, if goes as a failure, they need to learn from it. Failures can be both internal as well as external. But in good governance, corporate bodies need to learn from their failures, need to move to the path of success. And as a whole, I put that this way, that the concept of corporate governance works on transparency, integrity, accountability of the management and the board of directors. Be it finance, taxation or legal framework, each and every place requires good corporate governance. Corporate governance is a means, not an end. Corporate excellence should be the end. So once the good governance is achieved, and the Indian corporate governance body will shine to outshine the whole world. In Indian context, the need for governance has been highlighted because of the scams frequently occurred. So we had the Harshad Mehta scam, Ketan Parekh scam, Bhansali scam. So in the Indian corporate sense, there is a need to induct global standards, at least while the scope for scams may still exist, can be reduced to a minimum. Governance and ethical standards have any number of advantages. They gives a good brand image for the company. Once there is a brand image, there is a greater loyalty. When there is a greater loyalty, there is a greater commitment to the employees. And when there is greater commitment to the employees will become more creative. So in the current competitive environment, creativity is vital to get employees in the competitive edge. Corporate governance in the public sector cannot be avoided. It must be embraced. Corporate governance should be embraced. It has much to offer to the public sector. Good governance, good government and good business should go hand in hand. Okay, so this is what I want to discuss in this topic of Indian model of corporate governance. Thank you for listening. We'll meet you all in another session.